What's up guys, welcome to my Brewmaster Monk tank guide for Legion, patch 7.0.3. Now in this guide I'm going to go over your talents, spells and abilities, your artifact, traits and paladin choices, your stat priority, and then tank rotation as well as a demonstration of that, and then just macros and add-ons to help yourself out. Now let's go ahead and jump into the talents here. In your first row, Eye of the Tiger is going to be really nice for passive kind of self-sustain. You get a hot on yourself as well as a dot on the enemy. And so it's a heal over time. It's pretty nice and will keep you up a little more often, a little more self-healing there. Now, if you're in a large group kind of activity like a raid, for example, Chi Burst is really, really good. And it's really good for AoE healing. If you're not as concerned about healing yourself, but more kind of the group, then you can take this. And it's got a short cast, a fairly short cooldown, and just shoots its energy wave forward. Every enemy it hits does damage to, and every ally it hits it heals. So it can be nice to kind of top up the raid or help out with the heals a little bit in that sense, and for of course damage and threat in an AoE situation. Chi Wave I don't really recommend too much. It can be nice if you like soloing and stuff, but for self-sustain at least, just know that when you're in a group, it will bounce not just between you and enemies, but between your allies and enemies too, so sometimes they'll pick up the healing instead of you. So in those two cases, I would probably still recommend Eye of the Tiger. Now level 30, kind of up to you, all movement based, so you can either get extra rolls here with Celerity and a lower cooldown on roll. You can get an extra ability here with Tiger's Lust that removes snares on use and gives you a movement speed buff for 6 seconds for whoever you target. And then Chi Torpedo if you want to roll forward, kind of you go a bit further than roll does, and you get a little movement speed buff at the end. So just a different kind of movement. So I like to default to Tiger's Lust because there are situations like on Dragons and Nightmare where roots can be dispelled with this, although you might just end up saving it for yourself to pick up dragons and such on taunt swaps. But completely up to you what you need and what you prefer in this tier. Level 45, I generally recommend Black Ox Brew by default. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown, and it gives you all charges of your active mitigation abilities, which I'll get into later, as well as all your energy back. Now do note that 2 of your abilities, your Keg Smash and your Tiger Palm, will reduce the cooldown of all your brew abilities, and this actually counts for Black Ox Brew as well, meaning you get to use this way more often than 1.5 minutes, or every 1.5 minutes, so keep that in mind. Now, if you need more self-sustain, or if there's a lot of, say, magic damage, because one of your main defensive abilities is Stagger, which again we'll get into in a little bit, doesn't affect magic as much, so it's not as effective against magic, you can take Gift of the Mist. It's basically more self-healing at the cost of more defensive abilities, more damage reduction. But it just makes it so that your ability that pops out those healing spheres can proc more often based on how much health you're missing. So it's just more self-sustain versus damage reduction. I don't normally recommend this, but it's there if you want to play around with that, or if you like soloing stuff, or need more self-sustain for whatever reason. Now, light brewing, generally, I don't find it to be quite as good as Black Ox Brew, but it is entirely passive, so it's easier to play with if you're not comfortable with Black Ox Brew, and kind of maximizing the potential of that and the burst reduction potential of Black Ox Brew. It just gives you a lower cooldown on your 2 brews, your active mitigations, and also increases the maximum number of charges they have by 1. So entirely passive. If you're just getting into it and you don't want to focus too much on perfecting using your cooldown here, then you can take light brewing and it'll do pretty well. But I do find that it does underperform a little bit versus completely maximizing Black Ox Brew, which gives you more control as well over when you get this extra burst of mitigation. Now level 60, you can kind of pick whatever you like here. It's all CC based-ish. One note, Ring of Peace I'd never recommend in PvE. It's pretty worthless. Black Ox Statue is now a talent, so you can take this, and what it does is it just pulses AoE threat 30 yards around the statue. So it's really good for picking up adds that spawn pretty regularly. And also, if you taunt the statue, it does an AoE taunt around the statue, so it can be nice to have that as well. You have to be careful you don't pull extra stuff, say in like a dungeon though, if you put it somewhere and an ad happens to walk by a little bit too close, so do be aware of that. Now your other choice is Leg Sweep, which is an AoE stun around you. Pretty simple. If you need the stun, you need the extra CC, say in like a Mythic Plus dungeon or something. This is really good, but Summon Black Ox actually can be really good as well. So kind of up to you what you need and what you prefer. Now level 75, I generally recommend Healing Elixir by default. It is mostly passive, although you can use it as well. It's got 2 charges, short cooldown, heals you for 15% of your max health, and it will trigger automatically when you dip below 35% health, as long as there's a charge available, of course. So it can be entirely passive, you just let it do its thing, or you can use it to kind of pick yourself up as well, so you're able to activate it whenever you like. Now, diffuse magic, if there's a huge magic hit that you can use this for, this is really, really good. It reduces the magic damage you take by 60%, and it's on a 2-minute cooldown. And it has this other effect where it tries to throw any magic effects back onto the caster. Doesn't always work in raids, of course, but for heavy magic damage periods, big burst magic, this can be a really, really nice choice if you need that. Now, I don't really recommend Dampen Harm right now because 1, it doesn't reduce as much magic damage as diffuse magic. 2, you're giving up this really good heal as another option. And 3, the damage that you have to take is actually counted after Stagger. We won't get into exactly what Stagger is, but just know that basically you actually have to take more than 15% of your max health total. And so it's a little wonky in that way, so it doesn't proc as often as you might expect or like. So I really recommend Healing Elixir by default, and Diffuse Magic in sort of niche situations in which you need that magic damage reduction. Now, level 90, you've got a couple choices here. I will just say first off, do not take Invoke Nuzao, the Black Ox. It's just a really poor cooldown. It just taunts stuff, does a little bit of damage, and it doesn't even taunt raid bosses, so you can't cheese stuff with that. Generally, I like Special Delivery, especially in a raid setting. It's entirely passive, which is nice, and whenever you drink one of your brews, your active mitigation abilities, you've got a 30% chance to toss a keg, and then after 3 seconds it does a crap ton of damage to everything within 8 yards, and slows them, but it's basically extra damage, and it's passive, and it's really nice. Now your other option is Rushing Jade Wind. It's got a short cooldown reduced by haste, puts a tornado around you, it spins, and kind of does ticking damage, if you will, just does the damage every little bit of time, and it's really good for picking up adds. If, for example, you don't take some Black Hawk statue, or you're in a dungeon, so you're always needing to pick up adds, this is really, really nice, because you don't really have a spammable AoE like you used to. So this is nice for that, but it does add a global into your rotation, and another ability into your rotation, so just keep that in mind. For straight damage, Special Delivery, I believe, is stronger, but if you need kind of AoE pickup, Rushing Jade Wind is really good, and the damage isn't super far behind, so kind of up to you what you need in those situations. If you're using your active mitigation properly and with high uptime, then this is really, really good, Special Delivery. But they're both viable choices. Now, level 100, you've got 3 really awesome choices, and it's kind of up to you what you want and what you need on certain fights, for example. Now, I like to default to Blackout Combo. It empowers your Blackout Strike, and it makes it so that it buffs the next ability you use. It does different things for all the abilities, so I'll go through them really briefly. For Tiger Palm, it makes it do more damage. That's kind of the most worthless one, really. Breath of Fire reduces its cooldown by 6 seconds, and normally you would think this is just an AoE thing, but we'll get into this a little later, but with an artifact trait, it actually affects your survivability, so that's really good. For Keg Smash, it reduces the remaining cooldown on your brews, your active mitigation and Black Ox brew, if you took that, by an extra 2 seconds. So this reduces it by 4 seconds already, so if you use it with Blackout Combo, it is now 6-second reduction on your cooldowns, which is really, really good. And then for your 2 active mitigations, your Iron Skin Brew, it pauses your Stagger for 3 seconds. This basically helps you not take extra damage, and I'll get into exactly how that goes a little bit. And then if you use it with Purifying Brew, you get a stack of Elusive Brawler, which is your Mastery, which basically allows you to dodge more often. So both kinds of ways of reducing damage you take. So if you take Blackout Combo, just know that it will change your rotation, and you will have to kind of plan ahead for what you want to use this buff on. So it takes a little more thought and foresight and can be a little more intimidating. If you don't like that, you can take one of the other 2 talents. Now, Elusive Dance is really nice. It makes your Purifying Brew clear more Stagger, so kind of clears off more extra damage that you'll be taking on yourself, and it gives you up to 15% dodge and damage done based on how much you purify off your Stagger. So it increases your dodge chance and your damage done a little bit when you use Purifying Brew. This is really nice damage reduction because you do use Purifying Brew a fair amount overall, but it doesn't help you as much with, say, like burst damage. If a boss has a really big spiky ability, this is not so good. So If that's the case, or you're taking high damage a lot, where you're like always at high stagger, high tolerance is really, really good. It buffs your stagger a bit, so it delays more damage by default. And based on how high your stagger is, you get more haste. Now, haste is really nice for you, which we'll get into in the stat priority section, because it reduces the cooldown of a lot of your abilities, including your active mitigations. So if you're always at a high level of stagger, high tolerance is actually going to give you a lot more active mitigation than even Blackout Combo potentially. So the higher your stagger is more often in the fight, say on like Ursoc for example, you may find yourself at really high levels of stagger pretty much all the time. Like high tolerance might be very, very nice there. But in general, Blackout Combo will do really, really solid if you're okay with that playstyle. And we'll get into the kind of differences in a little bit. So those are your talents. Now let's talk about your spells and abilities. And I want to start with one of your passives, Stagger. It's kind of your bread and butter as a Brewmaster Monk, so it's very important that you understand how it works. Basically, instead of taking all the damage up front from attacks, you take a portion up front, and then you split off a portion that's taken over time. So a dot or damage over time effect. And just note that it is a little less effective against magic attacks, but it still works on them, just not as much. So what does this really mean though? So I whipped up this little example for you guys. If you take 100,000 damage, normally, you take that all up front normally, as a normal tank, another type of tank. Now with Stagger, instead what happens is you take 60,000 of it up front, but 40,000 of it is taken over time, becomes a dot on you. In this case, because it's 10 seconds, it'll be 4,000 damage per second. So you have a lot more time to react to the damage. Your healers have more time, you have more time, and so on. Now you will notice it doesn't reduce any damage, the Stagger, but it does split up the damage and allow more time to react to the incoming damage. Now, along with Stagger, you've got your active mitigation, which involves Stagger, and those abilities are Iron Skin Brew and Purifying Brew. And they kind of work together. They do share charges and they share cooldown. So when you use either of them, it puts both of them on cooldown and uses a charge of both essentially. So they're kind of the same ability split into two, if you want to think about it that way. How Iron Skin Brew works is it adds an additional 40% to your stagger amount. So instead of, say, in this example, having 40,000 split off, you'd have, say, 80,000. So instead of 100,000, you're now taking only like 20k damage instantly, and then you have much more being split off after over 10 seconds. So you have this dot damage. So you split off more to this dot effect, which helps out because, of course, you're taking less damage up front, and you have a lot more time, or healers do as well, to react and heal up the damage. So basically buffs how much damage is put off for later. Now, again, it doesn't actually reduce the damage you take overall, it just spreads it out over time. Now, Purifying Brew is where you can actually start reducing some of the damage you've taken, and what it does is it clears half of the damage you have on your stagger. So, in this case, if you had 80,000 damage put off onto stagger, you use Purifying Brew, and 40,000 of that damage just goes away, just disappears. You've kind of healed it off, dispelled it off, whatever you would like to think of it like, and that's where you actually get some damage reduction from using your Purifying Brew. Now, if it's a little complicated, I like to kind of think of it this way. I like to think of Iron Skin Brew as kind of my active damage mitigation, so my damage reduction, even though it doesn't actually. I like to think of it that way. And then you think of Purifying Brew as kind of a heal, quote unquote. Even though, again, it doesn't actually heal you, it does reduce the damage you're taking. Now, you do need to use them together to make this really work. So you need to be using Iron Skin Brew to kind of reduce the damage, quote unquote there. And then you need to Purify to actually take off some of that damage or heal. So I just like to think of it like that if it's hard to conceptualize for you. That's how I like to think about it. Remember, they don't actually reduce damage or heal, but when you use them together, they actually do help you survive a lot better. So those are your active mitigation spells. Now let's go into your damage spells. First up, we've got Keg Smash. It's a short cooldown, it's got a big range, and it splashes around the target and applies a movement slow debuff. It also reduces the cooldown of your brews, your Iron Skin Brew, and your Purifying Brew by 4 seconds. If you've buffed it with Blackout Combo, it's 6 seconds instead of 4, so a couple extra seconds off the cooldowns. Really, really useful. Now, then we got Tiger Palm. You can spam this ability as long as you have the energy to do it. And it just does a little bit of damage and reduces the remaining cooldown on your brews, the same abilities, by 1 second instead of 4. Now, we got Breath of Fire. It's a 15-second cooldown, it's not reduced by haste. It does a little bit of damage, but if you have the debuff from Keg Smash up, it'll actually apply a damage over time effect as well, so a little dot. And so make sure that you do use this when you have Keg Smash already on the targets. Additionally, when you get your artifact traits, which I'll get into in a little bit later, this Breath of Fire actually has a damage reduction component, which is quite nice and helps you survive better, as does Tiger Palm. So, Blackout Strike, it's free, very, very short cooldown ability, reduced by haste, does a lot of damage, and if you have Blackout Combo, of course, gives you that buff, Blackout Combo, which you can use on any of these abilities listed here. Now, I just want to make a quick mention now that we kind of know what Iron Skin Brew and Pure Stagger and all that stuff does. Just know that Iron Skin Brew, when you buff this and you use it on that, it will pause your stagger damage for 3 seconds. Meaning, say you have 80,000 to take, you pop Iron Skin Brew, and all the stagger you have, you take none of that damage over time for 3 seconds. So it just pauses it, and then it carries on. So it's kind of a nice, more kind of delay. It gives you more time to maybe purifying brew, or your healers to catch up if you're already low and you don't want to die to stagger damage, and so on. So that's kind of how that works. Just know that it helps you reduce damage even more. Then we have Expel Harm. Now Expel Harm relates to this passive over here, Gift of the Ox. Now what Gift of the Ox does is when you take damage, you can poop out this little healing sphere, which is really cool, and you walk over it and it heals you. Now, sometimes it's really hard to find these in a raid, so instead of having to run around and kind of look for these balls, Expel Harm allows you to just cast this, and it will draw in all the healing spheres that are around, that you've produced, and heal you for the amount, and do some damage to the enemies around you. So, it only hits one enemy when you do that. It's really more of a heal, so just know when it's available, you can heal yourself, and it will help you out and help you survive. Now, we of course have our defensive cooldowns. Now, the first one I want to talk about is Exploding Keg. This is your artifact ability. That's kind of a damage mitigation / burst AoE ability, and you use it and you have to target an area. You just toss a keg like so, and it blows up, and everything it hits takes damage, and they miss all their melee swings on you for the next 3 seconds. So put the debuff that makes them unable to hit you with their melee swings, which is really, really cool. So it's got a pretty short cooldown. It's like 1 minute 15 seconds, I believe. And you can just use it whenever you're taking big melee swings or just as an AoE pool, really nice burst AoE threat. And then we've got Fortifying Brew. Now Fortifying Brew is a 7-minute cooldown, and it does a lot of stuff for you. For 15 seconds you get more health, more stagger, and more damage reduction. You get 20% damage reduction as well as the stagger buff and the maximum health buff. Now, just note that the 7-minute cooldown is a little deceptive because this is actually also reduced by your Keg Smash and your Tiger Palm, so it will come up more often than it would seem. But just keep that in mind. It's a very long cooldown, and if you're not attacking stuff constantly, it still is a long cooldown. So it's there. It's not quite 7 minutes, but it is still fairly long. You just use this whenever you're about to take a huge hit, or you're just desperate and you need something. This is kind of your go-to. Now, Zen Med takes a little more planning, a little more knowledge of the fights to really use effectively. It's a 5-minute cooldown, and for 8 seconds you channel it, and you take 60% less damage. But if you get meleeed at all, so something walks up and smacks you, it stops the channel. So basically it's either good for one big melee swing, or good for abilities when you're not tanking, something like raid-wide damage, stuff like that, just for yourself though. So if you can squeeze it in like right before a huge ability by a boss, it can be really, really useful. Just know that it's very tricky sometimes, especially if you're tanking actively at the time. Other than that, we've got some utility. We've got a roll, of course, which rolls you forward from where you're standing or the direction you're moving. You've got your movement kind of helpers, your teleports, your transcendence. You put this down, and you put this little spirit down, and then if you use it, the other ability, the transfer ability, it will switch your positions with that. So it's kind of like a Warlock Demonic Circle, except it switches positions, so it moves your teleport position after you use it. So just keep that in mind. If you want to put it back down again, of course, you could then replace this and then use it again. But kind of something you can use if you're going back and forth on a fight between 2 stack spots, for example. In addition, for CC, you've got Paralysis, which is it disorients or kind of incapacitates an enemy for a minute. It will break on damage, so if anything goes over and smacks it, it will break. but it's nice for like trash packs and things like that. You got your Interrupt, of course, Spearhand Strike, and then you've got Crackling Jade Lightning, which you don't really use that often. If you need to hit something from a distance, and Keg Smash isn't up, I suppose, but you generally don't use it at all. Certainly not while actively tanking. Then you've got your Taunt, of course, and a heal that you don't use again while you're tanking because you're better off using other stuff, but just costs energy and does a little bit of healing on whoever you target. And then finally, you've got your Dispel in Detox. Removes poison and disease, not magic, as a tank, but just keep that in mind. You can use if you need to. And then for passives, there's one more I'd like to make mention of. Celestial Fortune makes crit somewhat relevant for Brewmasters. And basically, there's a chance that you get extra healing whenever you get heals, whether it's your own heals or someone else's heals on you, but that chance is equal to your crit chance, meaning I have, for example, 29% crit, so I have a 29% chance to get this extra 65% healing. So, those are your spells and abilities. Now, I want to get into your artifact weapon and kind of how you can choose to level it up. So, you start here, of course, with this ability, and you have to get full keg. Now, at this point, I actually recommend you go down here, get Potent Kick, which will increase the duration of your Iron Skin Brew, which is really, really helpful. It allows you to keep it up more often and without using it as often. And if you then go to Hot Blooded, then Breath of Fire actually becomes a damage reduction ability. It makes the damage of Breath of Fire's dot bigger, but also makes it reduce the damage done to you by that target by 2% per level. So as you get more, it'll be 6%, I believe, at the end if you don't have any extra relics. After that, grab Facepalm. It gives Tiger Palm a chance to deal more damage, but also reduce the remaining cooldown on your brews by extra seconds. So you get your brews up more often, which is really, really helpful. And then Nab Obstinate Determination. Now, this basically just helps your self-healing. Every time you drop below 35% health, you'll poop out a healing sphere. And I don't believe it has an internal cooldown or anything, so if you go below 35, pop up above 35, and drop below again immediately, it will pop out another one. So it's really, really nice for self-healing, really super useful. After that, I recommend going down this way to Dark Side of the Moon. It makes Blackout Strike a damage reduction ability as well, reducing the damage on the next auto attack done to you by that target by 2% per level, so 6% when maxed out. And you can go down here, grab Smash, longer keg smash range, pretty nice. You have to grab Staggering Around to get this golden trait anyway. It makes your Fortifying Brew better, essentially. More stagger. And then you grab Fortification, and it gives Fortifying Brew an extra ability, an extra effect, and gives you more dodge for 21 seconds, so helps you survive melee swings better, and it's really quite nice. Now after that, you could probably grab, you can either go straight for Brew-stache if you wanted, or you could grab like extra health from Healthy Appetite. But either way, you'll be going down this way next. So grab this trait and all the stuff leading up to it, and then finish off whatever else is left pretty much. So switch to the course remover, just movement speed. This is not super relevant to survival. Gifted Student is kind of nice, I suppose. Extra crit chance, so more chance to heal with Celestial Fortune after you dodge or heal, and you do dodge and you do heal fairly often. And pretty much whatever you want, you just finish up those two. Grab a Healthy Appetite if you haven't already, if you chose to just go straight for this one. And the last thing you should grab probably is Dragonfire Brew. It's pretty freaking worthless. Very small DPS increase, no play on your survivability at all, and that's pretty much how you want to go. So anything that helps, any relics that are good, or things that help your survivability, like longer Iron Skin Brews, for example, stuff like that, extra Hot Blooded, because you get more damage reduction, and so on. So that's kind of how you want to path with your Brewmaster Monk. It's really, I mean, you can always do whatever you want, right? Because you will end up with everything at level 34, but I really recommend that type of path. Not too much of a choice here. It's pretty clear what is helpful to your survivability as a Brewmaster Monk. So let's talk about your stat priority. Now, try to keep it pretty simple. It's a little more complex than some other specs, but we'll try to keep it kind of baseline. So first up is Haste. It's very, very good for you. Reduces the cooldown of a lot of your abilities, your Keg Smash, your Blackout Strike, and your Iron Skin and Purifying Brew, so kind of your active mitigation, meaning you get higher uptime on these two brews a lot, because Keg Smash, of course, reduces their cooldown as well, and so it's just really, really nice. Now at 30%, you start to get toward the global cooldown cap, where you're either your abilities are coming up too fast to really use them effectively and all the time, or you're wasting energy because you don't have time to squeeze in, say, like Tiger Palms to waste off some energy, kind of siphon off energy. So about 30%, you don't want to go too much higher. It's kind of a rough estimate there, but it's about there. You don't have to hit 30%, but haste is really good up until that point. Now, after haste, I recommend mastery. What mastery does is it gives you a stacking buff every time you get hit. So a boss smacks you and he hits you, and you don't dodge it, you get a buff. That increases your dodge chance. Now, when you finally do dodge, it will reset those stacks, and so you're back down to kind of 0, and just your basic dodge chance. So it's kind of like a luck prevention system, kind of like the bad luck prevention system for legendaries in Legion, except this one actually works. So, at some point, you will dodge every so often. Like, you will guaranteed dodge at some point on a boss fight because the stacking buff kind of helps you out. Because of that, there are these breakpoints in which you will only take so many hits before you guaranteed dodge again. So for example, if you have like the 5 hit breakpoint, you will only take 5 hits at most before you guaranteed dodge because of the stacking buff. So mastery becomes really good up until those points. So whichever breakpoint you want to aim for, you can use this little formula. And this formula, I take no credit for. This was from, I believe, Brewmaster, who put this on a guide. So this is the formula that he is given that will allow you to calculate how much mastery you need to reach certain breakpoints. So you just take 100, subtract your base dodge chance. So for me, that is 10.57, I believe. Yes, my base dodge chance is 10.57. So I enter that into here, and then you add 4.5, and take that number and divide it by whatever hit breakpoint you want. So the lower the hit breakpoint, so if you want like 2 hit breakpoint or 3, the harder it is to get. So you just plug in, maybe I want a 3 hit breakpoint, right? So you plug in 3 for this, you divide that by 3, and then that would give you the percentage mastery you need. Now in this case, if I did 3, I believe I calculated earlier, and it would be like 31.31%. So as you can see, it'd be really quite high versus what I have right now. If I did 4 hit breakpoint, it'd be a lot less, and so on. If you want to see the number you need, simply multiply what you get from that whole mess there by 350, and that will give you the actual number, the value of mastery, so this 4035 rather than the percentage that you need in order to achieve this hit breakpoint. So I'll put that in the description below, the formula, so you can copy and paste it or use it later if you need to. But basically, mastery up until those breakpoints is really good, and then after those breakpoints or in between the breakpoints, much less useful. Much less useful. So haste first, as much as you can, up till 30, no more though. And then mastery up to whatever breakpoint you've chosen that you want to use. And then for raids, I recommend versatility after that for straight damage reduction, and then critical strike last for raids. Now in Mythic Plus Dungeon, you can reverse the crit and versatility, because what crit does is essentially applied to your Celestial Fortune. So it gives you more healing taken, whether it's your own healing or other healers' healing. But in a raid, typically you're chopped off more often because there's more healers. And so a lot of that healing they do becomes overhealing, so it becomes wasted, not as good. Whereas versatility is just straight damage reduction, and since you'll be topped off more often, typically, this helps you survive better. Now, in say like a Mythic Plus dungeon, the extra chance to get bigger heals on you is nice because you don't tend to be full health most of the time. There's just you tanking, there's just one healer, and they have to heal, all these people, the other 3 people and themselves. So you'll get more benefit from this typically in, say, like a Mythic Plus dungeon rather than in a raid. So just to recap, haste, top stat, then mastery up to whatever breakpoint you have chosen, and then versatility and crit. Then that's for raids. Now for Mythic Plus dungeons, haste again, up until 30% at most, then mastery up to whatever breakpoint you've chosen, and then crits, and then versatility. Alright, now let's talk about your tank rotation. I'll start with the Blackout Combo version, and then we'll talk about the non-Blackout Combo version, whether you take Elusive Dance or High Tolerance. Those are pretty much passive, but they're pretty similar to each other. So I will start first with your defensive abilities, how you kind of use your tanky defensive abilities. As far as Iron Skin Brew and Purifying Brew, like I said before, I kind of treat them like damage reduction, quote-unquote, for Iron Skin Brew, and healing for Purifying Brew, quote-unquote. What I like to do is, use Iron Skin Brew, pretty much try to keep a very high uptime on this. Just having the extra stagger will help your healers even if the damage isn't technically gone, because it gives them more time to react. Anything that requires, say, if DVM or Big was like, use active mitigation, this is the ability you use to make sure you have active. Now, as far as using Purifying Brew, you want to make sure you have a lot of stagger, and you can see it on your bar here, this little 0% and 0. On the default UI, you can see little animations that show you approximately how heavy the stagger is, and you could use things like a weak or some sort of tracking add-on to show you exactly what's going on as well. And basically you want to use it when you're like at medium or pretty high stagger, so you're not wasting it, because using Purifying Brew means you're not using Iron Skin Brew for that charge, so you want to make sure it's worth it, that you're purifying off a good amount of damage. So in general, Iron Skin Brew is kind of my go-to for defensive purposes, active mitigation, damage reduction, quote-unquote, but that's how I think of it. And then when I get higher stagger, I purify off when I can. Now, Blackout Brew, if you took that talent, will reset the cooldown on your brews, and reset your energy as well. So you try to be low energy and definitely have all of your brew charges used. Do not have any remaining. You might as well just use them before you use it, because you're about to reset them anyway. It's kind of a waste if you don't. Do note that you want to use this as much as possible to get value out of it, and it is reduced by the cooldown of your Keg Smash and Tiger Palm, of course. So if you're about to use one of those, especially Keg Smash, make sure you Black Ox Brew, but just make sure you've used all charges of your brews, and you're not too close to getting one back. Like if you're 1 second out, you could wait a second, use say like Iron Skin or Purifying, and then Black Ox Brew, and continue on. So that's how you want to use that, basically as much as possible, but also you can use it for like burst situations where you might need to purify and Iron Skin but you don't have enough charges, things like that. Just use it when you need it, but try to use it as often as possible. As far as cooldowns go, you've got your Exploding Keg, and you do want to use this also as much as possible in general, unless there's a period of time that you really want to save it for. You can either use it as burst AoE threat and damage, or use it as that kind of blinding effect where they miss their swings on you for the next 3 seconds. To kind of whatever you need, but try not to let it sit too long or it's kind of a waste. And then Fortifying Brew, I treat it like a 3 to 4 minute cooldown, so very long, but not quite 7 minutes long, because it is reduced by Keg Smash and Tiger Palm. But it does a lot of stuff for you, so either Desperation or your biggest, hugest cooldown, essentially, especially with the golden trait that gives you the extra dodge. As End Med, it's kind of tricky to use if you're tanking. Either use it for like that huge swing if there's something like that, or like a Corrupted Breath maybe on Dragons of Nightmare, for example, or Elareth when she does in her rock form, for example, she might do that Talons ability. You could use it for the stuff like that, or like Volatile Rod on Ethendra if you're about to blow up. It's a 5 minute cooldown, just make sure you are not being swung at while you use it, or you will lose the channel. It's kind of weird, it's a long cooldown, but that's pretty much what you would use it for. Now as far as your offensive rotation goes, generally, we'll start with Blackout Combo, like I said earlier. You want your Blackout Strike as much as possible to be used, and you want to make use of each buff that you get. So every time you get Blackout Combo, you want to make sure you use that buff before you Blackout Strike again, otherwise you're wasting it. Now, as far as damage goes, Keg Smash is kind of your top priority after Blackout Comboing, and then Breath of Fire, and then Tiger Palm to siphon off extra energy. Now, Keg Smash and Breath of Fire should always be buffed by a Blackout Combo. These two you always want. Keg Smash because it makes your brews available more often, because it reduces the cooldown by 6 seconds instead of 4, which is really good. And Breath of Fire because it reduces the cooldown on Breath of Fire, which allows you to keep this hot-blooded artifact trait up more, which is a damage reduction as well. So, really, really important that you have Blackout Combo available for both Keg Smash and Breath of Fire. It's pretty worthless on Tiger Palm, so try not to use it for that if possible. Instead, in between if you need to, I recommend using it on Iron Skin Brew for defensive purposes. It pauses your stagger damage. It's really nice, helps you survive, delays the damage you're taking even more, and certainly during those 3 seconds you take a lot less damage. The Purifying Brew buff, not quite as good. You get like an extra mastery stack, helps you dodge, the next attack, but I don't find it quite as useful and as big a cooldown reduction, whatever, as Iron Skin Brew. So always Keg Smash, always Breath of Fire, and then Iron Skin Brew if there's kind of in between time, and if there's literally nothing else, like you don't want to use an Iron Skin Brew for no reason, or there's nothing going on, you're not tanking, you can use it on Tiger Palm, I suppose. Just extra damage doesn't do anything for you. Now, AoE rotation is actually the same thing, literally the same, except if you happen to have taken Russian Jade Wind, you would squeeze that in before you dump energy with Tiger Palm. And that's pretty much how that goes. Alright, now for non-Blackout Combo rotation, so if you have High Tolerance or Elusive Dance at level 100, basically a very similar thing, except Blackout Strike kind of drops to the bottom of the barrel, if you will. You Keg Smash on cooldown, really important. For single target, you'll probably want to make sure you're not wasting energy and use Tiger Palm. And then Breath of Fire for that damage reduction. For AoE, you basically kind of reverse that, and you'll Keg Smash, then Breath of Fire because that damage reduction is huge and it hits multiple targets, and then, siphon off energy with Tiger Palm. And then Blackout Strike in both situations, pretty much the lowest priority if you're tanking, if you're trying to be tankier. But if you're doing damage, then it's higher priority than Tiger Palm because it does a lot more damage. So, pretty simple. Always Keg Smash without Blackout Combo. Always Keg Smash first. Generally, Breath of Fire will be pretty high priority, but making sure you don't cap energy for single targets a little bit higher priority. And then after those, Blackout Strike just kind of to weave in for extra damage. So that's your rotations. Now I'll go ahead and demonstrate in an actual raid so you can kind of see how this is applied and used. So here we are in a fight, and I'll show you what I'm thinking and kind of how I do this. I am using Blackout Combo in this case because I'm kind of used to it, and I don't have the artifact trait for the Breath of Fire damage reduction, so I didn't use that as often as I should have. But I'll start with Iron Skin here, and then Keg Smash with the buff up, the Blackout Strike buff, just to get the instant damage reduction. Now here I need to purify some damage off because I'm taking a lot. I'll Blackout Brew to reset my stacks of brew so I can use more because I know there's a lot of heavy damage at the start here. And then this thing dies, and I stagger off, I purify some more, and now I'm not taking any damage. So I'm going to go ahead and just do damage. You don't want to use your brews, don't waste them if you're not tanking, because you want to have them up. Now if there's a lot of damage going out, like raid-wide damage, you could, but here there's not much going on, so I just don't want to waste them. I want to kind of get the cooldowns back as fast as possible, so when I need to tank, then I can have full stacks and be ready to do that. So that's pretty much all. At this point, you're just doing damage. Now, I'll go ahead and skip to a bit where I'm tanking a little bit more. And so here I've taunted this big ad that hurts quite a bit, and I've got my Iron Skin Brew up now, and my Eye of the Tiger, and I want to just kind of reduce the cooldown. Now, I would use Breath of Fire with the buff more often here. I use Exploding Keg because I'm taking damage. I want to kind of recover. I don't want him to be meleeing me too hard there. And keep my active mitigation up here. I get Iron Skin again ready for his Eye of Fate, and then purify the damage off when I can, and then Expel Harm to heal when I need to. I just walked over it in this case, and then just kind of keep that damage rolling, the damage mitigation, and then the tank finally taunts off a little bit late, but you kind of see I could have used Zen Med on the next I beam, I could have used Fortifying Brew, and so on. So you just want to kind of keep your stuff rolling, your damage mitigation, your damage, and so on. Now again, I just want to mention again, I wasn't using Breath of Fire with Blackout Combo as often as I should have because I don't have the trait, so it wasn't as important to me, but you should be if possible. So here I take off the tank again, get my active mitigation rolling. I see him taking some decent amount of damage, so I'll purify that off. My stagger got pretty big there. And then just kind of use my abilities. Now you'll see I've got Black Ox Brew coming up pretty soon, so it's available if I need to use it. And I do use it to get my stacks of brew back, purify off, keep my Iron Skin up. And that's pretty much how you want to kind of see things. React to the damage, know when it's coming, and be prepared to use what you need to. So as far as macros and add-ons go, I don't really use any macros on my Brewmaster Monk right now. I don't think there's anything really worth using other than, say, like extra action button if there's some sort of thing on a fight, but that's not really super relevant. As far as add-ons go, I do use weak auras, and that's most of the stuff you saw in the demonstration, all the stuff I'm tracking. Currently I'm tracking my cooldowns on the left here, Fortifying Brew, Black Ox Brew, Exploding Keg, and then on the right I've got my Iron Skin / Purifying Brew, both stacks and timer, my Keg Smash timer, my Breath of Fire timer, and then whether or not I have Expel Harm. So basically what happens here is whenever it's available, it will pop up and show me how many things I have, how many stacks I have of it, which is pretty useful. I've got my Blackout Combo tracker, this little teal blue line squiggly, and then I've got timer trackers for Eye of the Tiger, and for my actual Iron Skin Brew timer, just how long I have left on it. There's also something I don't really use, but there is a Stagger weak aura that I found a little while ago. And it's this Stagger bar, and I'll link it in the description below in case you're curious about it. Well, basically, it just shows you the amounts and kind of changes colors and stuff at different levels of Stagger. I don't use it, but it can be useful if you want to like move it around. You know, you can put it wherever you want on the screen, which is pretty cool. So something to consider there. But that's pretty much it for the add-ons. I also use, you probably saw the little icons kind of flashing out when cooldowns came up. That's just Doom cooldown pulse. And I don't really necessarily recommend it because you can do that in weak auras as well. I just keep it for tunes I'm lazy on or like minor things that I don't always keep track of. But it's there, and it basically does what it sounds like when something's off cooldown. It pops up, flashes, and lets you know, hey, it's off cooldown. Sometimes it's a little delayed though, but you can do that in weak auras as well. So you don't necessarily need that because you could just do it yourself. That's pretty much it for this guide. If you like it, feel free to hit it with a like. If you want to see when I post new videos like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel so you know when I put new stuff up. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section here, or if you can catch me when I'm streaming on Twitch, link in the description, and just ask me there or chill out and hang out with me. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.